The subjunctive in French is a grammatical mood that uses verbs to express an attitude toward an action, such as things that are imagined, hoped, feared, desired, or judged. Linguistically, it doesn't tell us when something happens, but how the speaker feels about it. In these final French lessons, I will explain how all variations of the subjunctive work in French, but the method will be different. In my very first French video, I presented things to know before learning French, one of which was the subjunctive. I mentioned that the mood is more about uncertainty or possibility than reality, and here I will really emphasize this point because it's something many people know but don't fully comprehend. In addition, it will make all subjunctives easy to understand and use, starting with the present subjunctive. Before learning its formation, it's very important to grasp what the subjunctive is in French. The subjunctive is in a world of subjective reality, meaning events that may or may not happen in general, thereby creating uncertainty or possibility. If the indicative says, "this is," factually, the subjunctive says, "this may be or should be," when it can be open to any possibility. The psychology of the mood can appear in sentences where two people's realities are in tension. A subject in a main clause influences the verb in the subordinate clause, like in this sentence. Je veux que tu viennes. I want you to come, or I want that you come. The main clause expresses will or desire, so it's a subjective reality for the speaker. At the same time, the subordinate clause describes something not yet real, and thus it's the grammar of influence that expresses a subject's attempt to change reality, whether through will, emotion, influence, recommendation, doubt, disbelief, denial, opinions, preferences, advice, needs, desires, orders, or any other possibility that gives the idea of uncertainty. There's a very big reason why I listed these traits, because across many French courses, you will see acronyms that a lot of people would recommend using, like weirdo and pando. While such concepts can be handy, they simply condense the most common uses of the subjunctive, but they don't actually explain what the subjunctive is or what makes it. This is why I've chosen this approach of teaching the subjunctive first, because it's a mood that represents something more subtle. Conceptually, it's the mood of possibility and uncertainty, so it's a linguistic window into how the French perceive reality and irreality. The subjunctive expresses something that may or may not be real in general, and even so, we can collect all of these ideas, put them in many sentences, and see it more reasonably. All of these phrases have the idea of uncertainty because we don't know if they will happen, and that's why it's called the subjunctive. By saying or simply thinking about these sentences, they all express a possibility that may or may not happen. The fact that a possibility can happen in general is what activates the subjunctive, regardless of what it is. If I express any of these sentences, it doesn't actually mean that these things will happen, and therefore it creates possibility. This is why learning the acronyms can hinder your comprehension of the mood, because yes, they do give a checklist of what makes it, but they don't give a specific idea. The specific idea is that all of these expressions, whether it's will or emotion or doubt or demand or order, are all uncertain, thereby opening a possibility. This is the true definition of the subjunctive, not just in French, but in any language. Think of it as a bridge between minds, where in French, it can be even more specific. A different technique that can be used to understand the subjunctive is through the word que. Que. French uses the subjunctive mainly after que, because it's activated when one clause depends on another's mental stance. One person's belief, desire, emotion, or whatever, and another person's potential action. An example is, il faut que tu comprennes. It's necessary that you understand. Here, the subjunctive reflects that the necessity is not inherent in the action itself. It comes from the speaker's evaluation. As a cultural and linguistic note, French speakers rely on the subjunctive more than English speakers because French values nuance in expression. It allows the speaker to acknowledge subjectivity and to avoid declaring something as absolute truth when it's only a perception. The subjunctive signals thoughtfulness, where the speaker expresses a wish but not control over the outcome. Now, after this long explanation of the mood, we can finally see the present subjunctive in French, which is the most common mood you'll see in written and spoken French. To conjugate verbs in this mood, we follow a basic pattern. Regular verbs make the subjunctive stem from the third-person plural form of the present indicative. By taking the conjugation, we remove the indicative ending and put subjunctive endings for the mood, but we make sure that the subject will always be in the essence of a possibility. These are the endings that we will need, which will be combined with a subjunctive stem taken from the third-person plural form of the indicative specifically for regular verbs. In context, they will be pronounced with the verb stem, so let's see some verbs from all types. Let's see the verb parler, to speak. To conjugate it in the present subjunctive, we take its stem from the third-person plural form of the indicative, place the stem across all subjects, and add the subjunctive endings that match each pronoun. Once again, make sure that the action is in the stance of uncertainty. Que je parle, que tu parles, qu'il, il, on parle, que nous parlions, que vous parliez, qu'il, il parle. An example can be, il faut que je parle à Marie. As a note, some conjugations can sound and look the same, even in the indicative. So to tell the difference, say them with the subject and que. The same thing goes for any other verb, like finir, to finish. To conjugate this verb, take its stem from the indicative, third-person plural, and add the subjunctive endings. Que je finisse, que tu finisses, qu'il, il, on finisse, que nous finissions, que vous finissiez, qu'il, il finisse. An example is, bien qu'il finisse tard, il est toujours poli. Notice that this example uses a conjunction with uncertainty. He's always polite, although he finishes late, when he can finish in any other way. Although he finishes this way, when it could be any other way, is what makes the sentence subjunctive. Now, let's see the verb attendre, to wait. To conjugate this verb, take its stem from the indicative and add the subjunctive endings. Que j'attonde, que tu attendes, qu'il, elle, on attende, que nous attendions, que vous attendiez, qu'il, elles attendent. An example is, je doute qu'elle attende encore. In general, this is the pattern for regular verbs in the present subjunctive, but we also have to see how irregular verbs get conjugated. Because French has so many, it's impossible to list them all. So here, we can see a chart that has the most common ones, but you can definitely find others. Irregular verbs in the present subjunctive will either change their stems or be completely irregular. In such a case, it's not necessary to show their individual conjugations because all we do is memorize their stems and add the corresponding endings to the subject we decide to use, as long as it shows uncertainty. So, we can simply remember the endings I showed before and add them to the stems of any of these verbs. Être, avoir, aller, faire, pouvoir, savoir, vouloir, prendre, venir, boire, devoir. Once again, these are the most common irregular verbs in the present subjunctive in French, but you can find more. Finally, we can have some examples with irregular verbs, and right here, you will really see how significant the idea of uncertainty is in this context. Je suis heureux qu'elle soit ici. I'm happy that she's here. Je ne pense pas qu'il ait raison. I don't think that he's right. Il faut que tu fasses attention. It's necessary that you be careful. Je veux que tu viennes demain. I want that you come tomorrow. Bien qu'il pleuve, nous sortons. Although it's raining, we're going out. The formation of some phrases in English may seem weird, but I rephrase them like that so that you can see the direct word order in French. What all of these sentences have in common is the idea of uncertainty, but they're expressed in different ways, whether it's emotion, doubt, necessity, desire, or even a conjunction. This is what truly makes the subjunctive in French, and it's even simplified in speech and is essential in writing and formal conversation. Also, it almost always appears after que, so it's a pattern to know, along with irregular verbs. Overall, this is how the present subjunctive fully works in French, and in the final French videos, we'll see how all subjunctives are formed in the language.